Hello, good morning, teacher. Today I'm going to present this information about translation. So I prepare a chart and some different information related with the topic. First of all, I want to explain the topics that I'm going to talk about. First of all, I'm going to talk about translation related with introduction, the meaning, the process, the models, as a language teaching tool, approaches to translating in class, and then I'm going to talk about translator competence, sociocultural knowledge, difficulties, steps to translate, and the traps and pitfalls. First of all, I prepare some information that I want to talk about. What is translation? In my opinion, translation is essential in our professional and normal life, since without it, there would be a lack of knowledge about new studies, technological advances, and mainly there would be a language barrier between peoples. That's why translation would be a way to be closer to other cultures, not only talking about scholar knowledge, and it is useful tool in every aspect of our lives. Everything is related with different languages and more nowadays with social media and apps, and that's the main reason that culture uses translation to be closer to others. As I mentioned in the reading, it started with the transferring activities from Greek into Roman. I remember that we were talking about some different meanings during all this course, and the meaning that I'm going to talk about right now is talking about the term translation, which is defined in some dictionaries as a process of replacing a text in a language with a text in another one. This definition highlights its linguistic function. However, translating is not just a linguistic act, it is also cultural, an act of communication between cultures, as we had mentioned before. From this perspective, translation can sometimes act as a meaning of learning about other cultures, a vehicle for the transfer of meaning, cultural values, and experiences. In certain contexts, translation is a process which refers to what happens when someone translates, while in other contexts refers to a product, a text reproduced in one language based on original text in another language. Students translate consciously or unconsciously while learning a language, and as a product, then translated text produced by students in context, where a technique is used for translation, and as we mentioned before, translation is a tool that we acquire meanwhile we are learning a new language. But we need to be careful so as not to overuse this, because we could be in danger to be depending to use it each time. But in a controlled way, this could work on ESL teaching. Okay, right now I'm going to talk about the process that we use. Here we have two different kinds of process. We have the practical process and the critical process. The first one, the practical approach, determines how to transfer the content of the source into the target. It deals with the process of translating. A professional translator moves from the concrete source text to the construction of the virtual translation to produce the most appropriate target text. We should take into account the different factors including communicative function, target language textual style, potential audience, and the requirements of the host culture and linguistic systems. On the other hand, we have the critical approach. Here, the textual characteristics may be manipulated in favor of the target culture or in resistance to it. They are the determining features of textuality and therefore of translation. This approach presupposes a finished translations. Here we have a literary criticism of translations and translation criticism. The first focuses on the literary or textual qualities of the word in translation. Translation criticism, on the other hand, appraises the text as a translation. Vázquez Ayora treaty contains a listing of skills and the names of tricks used by translators to overcome linguistic difficulties in translation. The reason for translating is that we are now aware that our neighbors talk and think in a different way from ourselves, and this is very important. The next thing that we have to do, we have different models when we're talking about translating. We have the linguistic, the text linguistic, the sociocultural, the computational, the psycholinguistic, and the interdisciplinary. I'm going to talk about all of them. First of all, we have the linguistic model. Here, The studies the linguistic resources of the source and the target languages and the mechanisms available in the target language for overcoming the difference between the source and the target in translation. Meaning is understood as a form of language, recoding and pragmatics is absent from it. On the other hand, the text linguistic model takes into account the various uses of language by speakers and writers in particular communicative situations. The expansion of translation studies into discourse analysis and pragmatics have shown that what a translation does is not exactly transfer of meaning. The transfer engages in a textual process of transfer and text production. Translation is text-induced text production. The next one that we are going to talk about is the sociocultural, and this means here we maintain that translation should always be read like translations. Lawrence Venuti said that translators shouldn't be invisible and that readers should be allowed to appreciate the source culture. Translations should resist dominant target language, cultural values. Venuti calls this restive or resistant translation. On the other hand, Newberg and Schreff do not agree. They hint at the fact that cultural values may be lost because the translator doesn't understand them. Translation is not a single process, but a set of situations specific. The next one is the computational. Here we have the computational model. At the time of appearance of machines, translator took over the job of all except literary translating, cultural and context dependent, were difficult even for supercomputers due to the formal equivalences between the source and the target language. The computer is a tool for the human translator and incorporates terminological lexical assistance, translation, strategics, encyclopedic, and knowledge organizational assistance, translation strategic assistance, and document management assistance. The next thing that we are going to talk about is a psycholinguistic. And here we claim the division of translating process has no ground in auto-translation behavior. The cognitive substrates should be matched with pedagogical concepts to explain modulations, transposition, and etc. Finally, we have the interdisciplinary. What is that? The equivalence between the L1 and L2 is exceedingly rare. Equivalence theories have given way to a view of mixed linguistically informed and socioculturally informed theories. For instance, we have the polysystems theory by Ibn Zohar directed to evaluating literary translation. Gideon theory drew on Chomsky and polysystem foundations and whose ideas have been transformed into pragmatically and socioculturally informed. Worst asked for corpus-based translation research. As linguistic system, pragmatic constraints, word knowledge, and meaning systems all converge in the act of translation. It is a synthetic process. Here we have translators are limited by a source text, but draw on their influence in the target language to create a target text. Okay? The next one that we are going to talk about right now, we are going to talk about as a language teaching tool. Translation is very important here. Translation as a language teaching tool. Translation, as we know, is a skill of interpretation and re-expression based on knowledge of language and facts. And besides, it's a tool to improve to the different existence between the second language systems. Stern distinguishes between intralingual and cross-lingual in language teaching. Translation is the principal in the layer using the L1 as a reference system. Widowson says that translation is a useful pedagogic device providing the most effective means of learning. Stern mentions the underpinning of cross-lingual activities. Summing up, checking on accuracy of learning using grammar questions, control and free use of the idiom, etc. The second point, awareness of context and form using the most language-bound items will translate into the student's mother tongue. Translators should be aware that translation can take a different or very different form. In fact, some items in one language take a different form in another in something that teacher and students know, but when teaching a language, equivalence at word level actually exists. The number 3 is the cognitive psychological reasons. As soon as students start learning to read and write a foreign language, some students translate consciously or subconsciously. The next point that we are going to talk about are the approaches to translating in class. Here we have different methods. Okay, the grammar translation method has a very bad reputation. This method is described in the subject methodological approaches, and this method is used. Approaches to translating in the classroom. Generally, sources reflect on the reject that the only foreign language should be used in a language learning class. This restrictive opinion is held by practitioners of the direct method. Source suggests that comparative discourse analysis via translation and the analysis of translation will afford students a greater understanding of both L1 and L2. They limit translation to only short sentences, elementary to intermediate levels. In this way, it's going to be easier. The source claimed that translation is only one of the many ways of highlighting similarities or differences between the mother tongue and L2. The source believed that translations can be valuable for the following reasons. The number 1, students can think they understand what an item means, but in fact be wrong. Translating it into their L1 shows this. Number 2, students' cognitive awareness of English compared to their own language is heightened. The number 3, many students no doubt translate either consciously or subconsciously anyway. Teachers should ensure that the students translate for concept, not for form. The translation of longer passages will have to be attempted depending on students' level and the difficulty and intention of the text. Students become aware of the difference and similarities, traps and breaches, the importance of coherence and cohesion, the appreciation of style, and thus proposes a brief and varied text rather than larger texts. Now, the next point that we are going to talk about right now, we are going to talk about the translator competence. So here we have to see the translation theory today. It has to do with the existence of overt and covert translation with cultural approaches, intercultural communication, and values, including pragmatics. But what is an overt and covert translation? According to House, covert translation takes place when the translation is not marked as a translated text of a source text, but it may have been created in its own right. In overt translation, different cultural presuppositions in the second language communities have to be taken into account. So the translator competence is not just knowledge of the second language system, but also communicative knowledge. Communicative knowledge is knowing how to use a language in a specific situation of interaction between human beings. Translation competence is the sum total of what the translator needs to know and how to do it, a good translation. Not every person with linguistic competence in second language can translate. Translation is not a cognitive bridge between two competences. Translating and interpreting require specialist knowledge and certain skills that are not innate. They have to be learned. We need to master not only the language's cultural system, also have to be dominated. The next one that we have here, we are going to talk about the sociocultural knowledge that is very important here. As teachers, our priority has always been to find the best way to teach and talking about translation. It's not simple as just translate like a machine. We need to know about different topics and vocabulary and even expressions in each topic, like financial, legal, technical, marketing, etc. An incorrect translation can cause headaches and also many mistakes. Teaching translation is usually done under the auspices of university translation and interpreting degrees. It is popular in Europe and its importance is increasing day by day. But why do we have to manage the sociocultural knowledge? It's extremely important in translating. The translator is immersed in a kind of cultural transfer. It requires him to be bicultural more than bilingual. he needs to know about culture, politics, economics, etc. Now that we are talking about these topics, we have to face the difficulties that we have when we are translating. Here we have the lack of proficiency in the source language, and the lack of intercultural competence. And what is that? The lack of proficiency. Comparative and descriptive analysis of translation shows that this is the source of translation that are not really apparent. Syntax and lexicon are usually correct and the text makes sense. The number two, the lack of proficiency in the source language, the most common example of inadequate and inappropriate translation. And the number three, the lack of intercultural competence or sensitivity. It may show little awareness of the cultural context in which it needs to be read. Finally, guys, we're going to talk about the steps to translate because it's very important. Okay, here we have the number one is the preparatory exercise. Okay, the L1 or L2 summary of an L2 text. These activities are not translation in this sense of cross-lingual mediation. Stern calls interpretive treatment of text, capturing the original author's meaning. Summary, translation, and the comparison of translation therefore become consciousness-raising activities in L2 acquisition, encouraging students to observe and analyze real language. The next one that we are going to talk about is the parallel text. They are literary texts or extracts from literary texts. Students should also be encouraged to bring to class any bilingual material like publicity, instructions, guides, etc. Students analyze the L1 version of an L2 text or translate the L2 into L1. Translating the L2 to L1 or the L1 to L2. These activities envisaged go from using text provided in textbooks prepared for the didactic purposes. Okay, determining register and learning how to use dictionaries, searching for appropriate expressions, translating into L1, focusing on the use of linguistic expressions in L2 in comparison with L1. And finally, consecutive interpreting of an oral messages. The next one, we have the translating L1 to L2. Using in grammar translation as inverse translation should be not attempt at the lower levels of language instructions. Advanced learners could try their hand an L2 version of L1. Moreover, the original text has already been translated officially somewhere else. Another exercise is scanning of both versions, then translating L2 and L1 or vice versa according to the student's level. Finally, we are going to talk about the traps and pitfalls that we can find when we are translating. Here they are very long sentences that can be split easily, sentences without a main clause, technical terms or false friends, ambiguity, redundancy of repetitions, register including stylistic devices or register that don't exist in L1, or excessively sparse style, metaphors, allusions, terms or phrases with unfamiliar connotations, idiom expressions or proverbs. I'm going to show you some different aspects or pitfalls or traps that we can find. For example, here we have one expression that is very difficult when you are translating. Here we have, you are the apple of my eye. Okay, if we translate this word by word or literary, you're talking about maybe a fruit. But this is an expression that you refer when you have a very important person for you. Okay, we have other that it's could be a trap. For example, here we have hell or high water. What is hell or high water? If we translate it word by word or we don't know about the culture, we can have a bad translation. Hell or high water in this case is that something has to be done. Okay, that's right, in one way or in another. We have other expressions, for example, okay. Okay, this expression, if you don't know about the story of this expression, could it be with different meanings? So we have to know about these cultural events just to explain this expression. And then we have some other idioms. For example, here we have four. We have like to piss in a pot when you are very similar to other people, or to bury the hatchet to end a conflict, or maybe to be feed us tips to be very close or friends. Here we have. So if we don't know about story, about culture, we will have many problems when we are translating. Finally, we have like this, as to end, we have this expression. Without translation, we would be living in provinces bordering on silence. This is very important. So to finish with this, remember that translation could be a very, very useful tool when we are teaching English. But we can be aware so as not to overuse this. That's all. Thank you.